Welcome everybody to Future Transform. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your organizer and chief cat herder for the next hour. Today we'll be talking about open education resources, but first let me introduce you to the event. Next slide, please. This is the Future Trends Forum. The forum is a project spun out of my Future Trends in Technology and Education project. FTTE is a monthly environmental scan and trends analysis report published through email. It's been running for a few years, so at this point we have a lot of trend information, a lot of good longitudinal analysis. So if you're interested, please go to ftte.us and you can find out more, or just ping me directly. Be glad to talk. Next slide, please. We'd like to thank NiserNet for their support. They've been a very energetic and generous supporter of Future Trends, and we thank them very much. We appreciate the sponsorship. Next, please. We'd also like to thank Shindig, because Shindig has done two major achievements for us. First, they provide this software. They provide this technology that allows this video conference to happen. And they also provide wonderful staff. Today we have Nathan Sokolnik. We've in the past had Christopher Downs, who should be available in Arizona right now. Your support is greatly appreciated. You guys are awesome. Next slide, please. Now that burst of sound came from an unusual source. Over in Arizona, there's a conference going on, and that conference has a live feed coming in to us right now. So hopefully they'll poke in and get a sense of what's going on. Now, if you didn't hear that burst of sound, no worries. Just take a look at the Mingle bar, at the crowd of people, and you'll see them. It says live from ASU. Not Arizona, San Diego. Now, let me introduce our guest for today, Cable Green. Cable is the Director of Open Education for the Creative Commons. If you don't know the Creative Commons, it's an awesome alternative intellectual property registration declaration project, which he'll explain. Cable is readily available on Twitter, very active there. And you can find out more about him on Creative Commons. So let's get rid of the slides. Nathan, can you bring Cable up on stage, please? Some suspense. Waiting for him to come, and here he is. Greetings, Cable.
Hello, Brian.
Yeah, your sound is good. But listen, you said you were in Olympia, Washington?
I am.
But there's sunlight coming in the window. I can't believe you're actually in the Northwest. I mean, that's got to be some kind of mistake, right?
It'll last a couple days. It'll start raining soon, not to worry.
Oh, good. I want to make sure that my basic assumptions about reality are maintained. Welcome. I'm very glad to see you. Thank you for your time. I look forward to this hour of conversation. To begin with, I wanted to ask a very precise and specific question. You just flew back from Eastern Europe, where you were part of a major international conference in open education. What can you tell us? What news from Krakow? What have you heard from the cutting edge of open education?
Yeah, happy to talk about Krakow. It was a great conference. I'm just wondering, would it be helpful just to do a very quick kind of what is Creative Commons and what is OER? I'm wondering if everybody knows.
Well, let's just ask quickly in the chat box. Does anyone want us to spend some time defining open education? Let's go ahead. Benjamin says no. Well, while people are thinking about it, why don't you give us the quick 30-second Creative Commons intro, because that way this will be on YouTube forever, and so people will know what Creative Commons meant in April 2016, and everyone can be on the same page. And
Good.
OER we'll get to.
We'll keep it under 30 seconds. Alan Levine says go deep. Thanks, Alan. So it sounds like this audience is fairly familiar, but just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, the reason we get to have this conversation about open educational resources, and we'll talk about open pedagogy and open policy today, I'm sure too, is that really we've got an interesting set of factors which have converged, mainly content's digital. We've got the internet and we've got Creative Commons licensing. And so we have the opportunity to store, copy, and distribute openly licensed educational resources for the marginal cost of zero. So Creative Commons sits in that part of the mix as the global standard for open licensing for copyrighted resources. So we're now 15 years old, we're a nonprofit, we're global, we've got teams all over the world, and basically what you can do is keep your copyright at an open license, at a Creative Commons license to your work, and others can use it under the terms that you've selected in your license. So we've got different licenses. We also have public domain tools, so if you want to give up your copyright and dedicate the work to the public domain, you can do that too. How's that, Brian? That was under 30 seconds.
That was remarkable. That was elegant. And I'm just flabbergasted that Creative Commons is now 15 years old.
15 years old, and we just, I'll throw a link in, but we put out something called the State of the Commons report every year, or we have for 2 years. It will be every year from now on. And we just passed 1.2, 1.3 billion licensed Creative Commons works on the web, and the curve is hitting J-curve. So it's accelerating quickly, and the work we're doing with platforms is 99 in web years. That's right. Okay, so let's talk about Poland.
Oh, what were the highlights of the conference? What did you take away?
Yeah, so the Poland, we were in Krakow. It was the Global Open Education Consortium conference, and so this used to be the Open Courseware Consortium. They're now the Open Education Consortium. So the main audience are universities from around the world. So the focus of the conversation was about what's happening at universities, what colleges and universities are doing. It was a very higher ed focused conference. Great sessions. I think the two that really stood out to me, one of them was on linking open data and open educational resources. And the idea being that from many perspectives, more and more data is being collected as people learn, as they're engaging with content, as they're engaging with their educational opportunities. And how can that data be used to iteratively improve content for everything around personalized learning pathways to providing students real-time feedback and faculty as to where they are. These are all things we've played with before. But the openness component of the data, the real presentation was using open data from government or from other sources to actually make that the content, to make that the curriculum. So that if you're studying chemistry, it's not just some stale content in a textbook. You're actually getting live data out of your local stream of the pollutants that are in it and studying it that way. And so it was. There were some real nice connections between open access and OER, open data and OER, work that's happening in open government, and trying to bring that into the OER movement. So I thought that was really nice. The other thing that was noteworthy, there was a side meeting on the third day called the Oer Policy Forum. And we pulled together 20 nations from around the world. There were people from government and OER and open policy experts. And the focus was really on what can national governments do to ensure that their publicly funded educational resources are openly licensed by default. And we talked about why they would want to do that. What's the value to government? What's the value to the public? And then what are the focal points of the why? So there was a lot of discussion. I thought very healthy discussion about that. The open license isn't the point. Having OER isn't the point. The point is, how do we get to ubiquitous, open, free access to high quality educational opportunities and resources so that you have educated citizenries in democracies, so that people have information that they need to engage, not just as citizens and in just societies, which was part of the conversation, but also when things are open, when the data is open, when the education and the content is open, there's an opportunity to turn learning into solving global grand challenges, or the United Nations calls them Sustainable Development Goals. And so there was a really interesting conversation around how do we bring education as a global establishment. I mean, every country in the world has big investments in education. How do we bring that closer to what the United Nations and other IGOs are talking about in terms of global warming or clean water or refugee crises, or take your pick of a global grand challenge? And how do we start to make those challenges, that data, those educational resources, the curriculum as people are learning, both so that the learning is more interesting and engaging and authentic, and we know that that's important as people are learning, but also so that when people are learning, they're actually doing something more useful, more contributed, that's not a word, where they're contributing to solving challenges in society.
Those are two enormous movements. One being very technical, thinking about linked data as a way to better provide all the benefits of linked data, feedback, and probably building better content on top of it as the curriculum. But then also trying to get, I love your point, the way you summarize this, that the point isn't OER itself, the point isn't open of itself, the point is to get the best quality information, best quality learning into people's hands and minds so that we can solve what the UN calls the big global challenges. I've got to ask, how do you, well, I'll come back to that, because it's actually a general question. Let me ask, how was the mood? Were people excited, energized?
Yeah, I think the movement's starting to hit mainstream. So we know this from, there was some good ecosystem research done by Hewlett and the Boston Consulting Group that showed in the United States anyway, that OER is starting to hit tipping numbers. So we're right around 15-20% adoption. That's exciting. It also brings with it a whole host of challenges, as we know. And so I think the mood of the movement, or at least the mood of that particular conference, was to say, hey, let's take a step back and reassess how far we've come and, wave the flag a little bit. This is all great. But as we move forward, what are the next steps? And so, for example, there was a lot of critique and discussion about how in the United States, there's a real focus right now on open textbooks and on Z degrees. And a Z degree is a whole degree program that has no textbook costs, and a lot of the curriculum is OER. And that's great, and these are very positive things, and there are reasons why the United States is focusing on that, and that's mainly because the textbooks are so incredibly expensive. And Z stands for zero textbook cost degrees. That's what a Z degree is. And whereas in, say, Europe, the focus is very much on open praxis or on open pedagogy. So I, in my opinion, this is the more interesting conversation, and that is, what can you do with open that you can't do when it's closed? So Alan Levine is here. He's one of the best in the world at this, at really experimenting when the technology's open, when the content's open, when the data's open. What sort of new learning experiences can happen, can be designed, can be shared that can't happen when they're closed? And so one of the things that people are talking about is on this, as far as students or learners are concerned, how do you start to give them assignments that are not throwaway assignments, as David Wiley calls them, but they are assignments to update the software or the curriculum or the learning space or even the instructional design of the course? How do you give them an assignment to update chapter 2 because I'm studying chemistry and 3 new seminal research studies just came out and my book is 3 years out of date and it's a brand new book?
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. That's the European perspective.
They're very much focused on that, which I think is much closer to where we should be focused. Although, what the Americans are doing are, I would say, is foundational. And until you've got accessible, affordable educational materials and learning spaces, people simply can't get in. And so that's important. What the Europeans are focusing on is equally, if not more important. And then there's a whole conversation in the Global South right now around, look, people ignore copyright. They just take what they want anyway. There's a big study that just came out of University of South Africa that said only 1 in 5 students are paying or legally accessing the educational resources. The rest are pirating. because there's they really have low resources, don't have a lot of money, and B, there's just a culture of if it's on the web, it's taken, right? And so they're having a conversation around, look, how much attention should we be paying to licensing and copyright, or should we, be challenging copyright regimes and proposing something else that meet our needs more directly? In the same way that Brazil, has stood up to the drug industry and simply said, look, I don't care if there's patents on that drug, my people need it, and we're going to produce it in a generic sense. And so none of these things are opposed to each other. They're all part of the discussion, but it creates a very robust discussion among the global community because it's a global movement.
That's an important part to remember, that this is a transnational development. And in fact, when I work with a lot of some provosts in the U.S. and they ask me why they should consider OER, I tell them, well, produce OER because that gets to contribute to the commonweal. This may or may not excite your students and faculty, but this is important on the world stage. Well, the second area I was going to ask you about, Cable, was trends in open education, and I think we've already started talking about that. You described some of the trends in the European environment, some of the developments in the U.S., and also this interesting dynamic of people just taking stuff. In fact, I think that played a role in Pearson's decision to lay off some people. They complained specifically about South African sales being low. Let me ask, what are some of the other, beyond what you learned in Krakow, what are some of the current trends that we should be watching in OER adoption?
Sure. So I'll try to give examples from all over. Hot off the press, State of Oregon just announced about $350,000 in grants for public higher ed faculty and staff. So we're seeing more and more of that kind of thing, where public governments, both at a provincial or state level and at national levels, are coming forward and saying, hey, this just makes sense. And I dropped in the chat window some of the reasons why government thinks this makes sense. They want everybody to have access. They see it as an equity issue, and they see it as an efficiency argument. So if we're going to spend public money on education, we should use all of the tools of the day, digital, internet, open licensing, et cetera, to maximize access to what we spend on the public dollar. So this idea of the public taxpayer dollars being used to actively support OER, open access, open government, open data, transparency is a trend, and I think it will continue. We see this playing out right now in the open government partnership all around the world. The United States, Slovakia, Mexico is looking at this right now, or actually, as they write their national action plans, which are what they're going to do next year for their open government partnership commitments, they're weaving in these ideas, OER and open access and open policy. Another big trend is open policy. And by open policy, we oftentimes mean open licensing policies. So on the funding requirement, if you take this money, you will put a Creative Commons license on what you build. And usually they're specific about which license. And more often than not, it's the CC BY license that is required. So we saw that this year from the US Department of Labor. All grants that labor funds are now CC BY required. Department of Education is considering the same thing. Right now, we expect that in the next 2-3 months, they'll announce the same policy. Department of State, move in this direction. USAID already requires CC BY in all of its contracts. So this is a trend in the US government where agencies are starting to say, if you take our money, and remember, this is optional, discretionary grants. Nobody's forced to take any of this money. But if you take this money, you'll share with the public what the public paid for. And of course, we're seeing this all around the world with academic research as well. This is the case in the European Union, in the United States, in Canada, now where you take public funds to do research. More and more agencies, both private and public, are requiring openness on the products of grants. We're also seeing other types of policy that encourage, remove barriers to OER, provide sets of resources. So the Oregon policy is, here's a little bit of money to help you learn about, adopt, create OER. In Fiji, they have a new OER national policy that talks about why OER makes sense for the whole country. In Nigeria, the Open University in Nigeria, which I believe has more than 250,000 students, has an initiative where they're moving completely to OER.
So overall, I mean, you could say that there's a lot of government interest, both local, provincial, regional areas, but as well as national areas, to advance OER.
That's exactly right, and that's frankly part of the conversation in the OER movement is how do we connect all these folks? How do we connect the IGOs, things like the Paris OER Declaration out of UNESCO, and OECD just came out with a big OER report. So these are IGOs. How do we connect then national governments to them so that they can take those recommendations and do something positive at a national level? And how do we connect the national governments with amazing projects like the National Open University in Nigeria that's moving all in on OER. University of Maryland, University campus, UMUC is doing the same thing, moving the whole institution to OER. In New Zealand, the school boards are giving the K-12 teachers permission to CC license the works, even though the school district owns the copyright to everything. They're doing the same thing in the city of Leicester in the United Kingdom. And so, government's trying to figure out what can they do to support with a light touch and in a permissive way, and not to be a heavy hammer on any of this, but to be encouraging and helpful when people want to move to open.
Cable, this is terrific. I don't know if you can see, I'm taking notes in about 4 different windows here, because this is very, very rich. And just to remind everybody, we have, we're recording this on YouTube, the YouTube recording plus my notes plus whatever else we do to record this will be available next week at some point. I have a couple of questions. And one comes from Paul Baldridge, Wisconsin, so right between us. He says, Cable stated that the conference was geared around higher ed. Does OER currently exist in the pre-K through 12 sector? Good question, Paul. Yeah, so I gave a couple examples in both New Zealand and the UK. Since most of I think are from the US, let me give 2 examples. So I'm going to drop these in the chat window. The first one is the K-12 OER Collaborative. The idea here is, see how strong I want to be on this. Let's be friendly. The current marketplace in K-12 in the United States around textbooks for K-12 schools is fundamentally broken. It ranges somewhere between $6 billion on the low end to $9 billion a year on the high end in the amount of money that K-12 schools spend to acquire not just new textbooks, but other instructional materials for the classroom. For that spend, which is a lot of money, and it's public money, most of the school districts, even though they're spending that much money, have books and other educational resources that are on average, not all of them, but on average between 10 to 11 years old. In my school district, they're on average 15 years old. So old outdated content. It's usually paper only. So even though more and more kids have access to digital devices, and we've got major initiatives through the FCC and other means to wire schools, most of it's paper. Because we have to keep these resources, the schools do, over a decade plus, the learners are not allowed to write or scribble or put stickers on any of these resources, including no highlighting or taking notes, because we got to keep them for 10 plus years. If the students lose the resources, more often than not, there's a policy that parents have to pay to replace them. And if you are a parent that doesn't have a lot of money, this happens in my school a lot. I see parents tell their students, tell their children, do not take your educational resources from school to home.
and back to school because you lose things, and we can't afford to replace the textbook because the school's going to charge us $100. And so we've got a division, at least in my children's school, of haves and have-nots based on the parents' income and whether or not kids can take resources home to do their homework. And then I would say worse, we've got some amazing teachers in my school and others, and the teachers can't update any of this 10-year-old content because it's paper and it's all rights reserved copyright. So that's what we buy for $9 billion a year in the US. The K-12 Oer Collaborative says that system sucks and it's a huge waste of money and we can do better. And so we, the states, are going to form a collaborative, and it's going to be a design and procurement collaborative. So we are going to determine what content we want, how we want it designed. We'll put together millions of dollars, not billions, but millions, and we'll put out open competitive RFPs that anybody from Pearson to the University of Utah Math Department to Alan Levine can reply to these RFPs. And the condition is that we, the states, hold the copyright to what's built, the vendors are work for hire, and we, the states, will put a Creative Commons attribution license on everything we build and share it for free with anybody that wants it. And so that's the K-12 collaborative that's happening right now. They've put out their first RFPs. They're building math grades 6 through 8 right now. And then they're going to build out the rest of math, and then they're going to move to English language arts. And for those of you who know K-12, those are the two Common Core areas. And then after Common Core is done, they're going to move to all other subjects and other grades. So that's one example.
Let me pause you there right now. And I think that's fantastic response. What a rebellious and insurgent project that is. I'm glad to share this. Paul just responded back in the chat box. We had a second question that came up from Benjamin Stewart. And he was referring, I think, to the higher ed examples, but I think this would also apply to K-12. He wants to know, given these examples, are licenses being issued to individuals or to institutions?
Are licenses being issued? So say more about that.
Ben, if you could take a minute and say more, or if you want, we could put you up on stage so you can actually speak. That might be easier. So if you want to speak up on stage, just click the raise hand button. If you want, just enter the chat box and you can say some more there. Ben on the spot right then, that's what we just did. It's somebody's phone. It could be anybody's at this point. We're all surrounded by devices. Well, while Ben's thinking about it, then we can come back to that. We have a different question.
Here's example number 2. While Ben's thinking, the U.S. Department of Education is throwing its weight behind K-12 OER in the United States, and I've dropped in the link to their homepage on this. They have a national effort called Go Open. And Department of Ed in the United States actually has a full-time OER staff member, and this is his full-time job, is to work with states and school districts around the country to help raise awareness about OER and open licensing, to tie OER with the investments in teacher professional development, in wiring schools, in devices, digital devices for kids in schools, and for the high quality content piece of it's called the Connect Ed initiative is all about OER. And so, I mean, this country is involved at the highest levels, and they're doing some amazing work.
That's great. It seems like a long revolution. Well, let's. You're welcome, Paul. Ben followed up. I hope you don't mind me calling you Ben. I assume that OERs can be created by the individual or through the institution, depending on who owns the content. Based on your experience, how are others doing this?
Yeah, good question, Ben. So the way that it works is the author or the creator, whoever that is, they automatically have copyright to the work that they produce. So if I produce something today, if I scribble something down on this piece of paper, I actually hold copyright to it automatically. I don't have to file with the government. I don't have to put a little C with a circle around it. It's automatically copyrighted. Now, if I'm work for hire, so like I work for Creative Commons, and in my contract it says everything I create in the course of my work Creative Commons holds the copyright to it. That's fairly common in a contractual basis between the employee and the employer. That's why you see faculty in higher ed or teachers in K-12, when they want to write a book or something, they'll do it on their own time, at home, on their own device, so that it's clear that they hold the copyright. Nevertheless, the copyright holder can choose to keep all rights reserved, which is the default, or with Creative Commons licenses, they can simply add a Creative Commons license to their work and share it with the world, the public, under the terms and conditions of the license they chose. And so you're right, it can be created by the individual or an institution. The question is who holds the copyright, and then it's the copyright holder which decides whether or not the thing gets openly licensed. Did that answer your question?
That's a pretty solid answer. And then I wonder if it's going to take, if that'll make you wonder about how institutions should structure this. But people, we're having questions, and that's a good transition to the next step, which is we like to have you and I both step off the stage, and we have the audience mingle. We have people talk to each other. And so the way this is going to work, friends, especially if you haven't done this before, is Cable and I will disappear from the top, and we'll join you individually. So on the very bottom of the screen, you see all these icons with people's faces smiling and not looking a little horrified and terrified. Just click on somebody else to join them and talk with them. So you can either just click and speak out loud, or you can use a chat box and chat privately. So what I'd like you to do for the next 3 minutes is discuss where you are seeing open education and Creative Commons interest at your institution. And if you're working at a college, university, a library, museum, K-12 school, or wherever. So where are you seeing open education interest there? And then come back in 3 minutes. So Nathan, if you could kick us off the stage, please. Okay, welcome back up. It's like we are literally running back and forth from the stage to the crowd. Cable, the people I spoke with described 2 different levels of campus engagement with open education. One was actively producing some, another one was showing some leadership interest. How about you? What did you find?
Yeah, so, well, we were actually, I got talking with, who was I talking to? I was talking with Alan Levine, and I talked with Terry as well. And we were chewing on the national government a little bit and open policy, and talking about a new Creative Commons certificate that Alan's helping us build, where we're going to have a kind of a robust, if you want to become an expert in open licensing, take this certificate, you'd be certified in Creative Commons, and we're going to build one for government, for librarians, and for educators. And then we were talking about how we're going to create spin-off derivative works, because of course the whole thing will be under a CC BY license. And so Brian, I'm embarrassed to say that we failed your assignment.
Well, we got something. We got something. I'm glad to hear it. If I could, let's bring up Christine from University of Saskatchewan, because she had a really, really good idea. Christine was describing that she had a project on campus where there's an RFP and a producing OER content. But I'm going to mangle that. Christine, why don't you say a bit more about this?
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. So I work at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm an instructional designer. And we just started moving into this area of open education resources and open textbooks. There's a really big push right now to produce open textbooks on campus. Our province created a a grant for the university so that we can produce, I think, about a handful of textbooks. And so I started working on a biology textbook with an instructor, a professor, I guess. And I guess to kind of get us started, we hadn't done this before and we didn't know what approach to take. So we went to BC campus and I found a authoring guide that they had produced. And lo and behold, it was an open textbook. So we adapted it. We created an open textbook. I'll give you the link. And what we did was we personalized it for the University of Saskatchewan. It was a hands-on way to develop an open textbook. The really nice thing about it was that we learned how to use WordPress. We created an install of Pressbooks to produce the book, and it was hands-on learning. And then we kind of flipped back and forth into the guide and kind of figure out what we were doing. When we had a question, we looked in the guide that we were adapting to create our own guide. It was really, I guess, kind of a roundabout process.
That sounds like a very practical.
Yes, I do work with Heather Ross. She's at the university as well.
Excellent. What unit at the university pursued this?
I work with the distance education unit. So I've been an instructional designer for the last 2 years, but I work on online courses traditionally. So this is a very new area for us. So instead of creating courses, we're creating textbooks now.
What a phrase. Instead of creating courses, we're creating textbooks now. That's what a paradigm shift. And thank you for mentioning this. There's if anybody has any questions, actually, tell you what, Nathan, can you boot me off and put Cable on so Cable, the expert, can say a few words?
I think I'm up. Hi, Christine.
Hi.
So Christine made a really important point, and that is that one of the things that happens when a university or a government does something really useful, like all the amazing stuff that's coming out of British Columbia and Alberta, is that when you put an open license on it, other people can use it and they don't have to recreate the wheel. And so I dropped a bunch of links in, but one example I just wanted to point out was BC Open Textbook. So this is at the in British Columbia. They decided that they wanted to have a whole project around open textbooks. They were going to have a library of open textbooks and faculty reviews of open textbooks, because of course faculty care a lot about what other faculty think when they're making a decision about whether to adopt or take the time to update or modify a resource. And so they started doing that, and then they discovered that the University of Minnesota had a very similar project, and I dropped the link in for that as well, the Minnesota's Open Textbook Library. So those two got together and said, you know, hey, when you have new textbooks that you put up in yours, they're open, they're under an open license, could you let us know? And we might put that in our library as well. And when your faculty do a review of an open textbook, would you be willing to share that review with us? And so they're actually openly licensing the reviews. And then, you know, California, this was a while ago, but California, Oregon, and Washington came forward and said, hey, we're doing open textbooks as well and sinking a lot of public money into these efforts. Why don't we all these provinces, these multiple US states, and anybody else that wants to come, why don't we meet once a year? Let's have an open textbook summit in British Columbia, and let's just share. Let's talk about who's doing what. And if we accomplish nothing else than not recreating the wheel, that in and of itself is a reason to meet. So let's not duplicate efforts, let's not waste money. But I think we can do better than that. We can actually set plans together. We can divide the labor so that everybody doesn't have to work as hard. We can share the expenses on projects. And so this group started out of like 12 people, And now the conferences in BC are hundreds of people because so many people want to come. Yep, the OE, I mean, there's a lot of examples of it, right? The Open Education Consortium, CCC OER, if you're a community college and you're in the United States, the Community College Consortia for Open Educational Resources, and then all the great examples that Christine had.
I think, too, that approach of sharing is it's sometimes hard for people to grasp that you're sharing, that everything is open, that it's out there, that, you know, it can be remixed and changed, and you can put it on your website wherever you want. You can, you know, have those files in whatever format you want and make them available to people. It's kind of, I guess, it's almost really inspiring.
Yeah, so Christine, let me ask you a question. You know, I think there's probably a lot of consensus in this room that sharing is a good thing. Education is fundamentally about sharing. We should share academic research. If I write an open textbook, I should put an open license on it so everybody can use it. I mean, I don't think you get a lot of argument in this room. But what's your experience in working with faculty? Why do you think, what are the environmental factors, or why do you think faculty kind of start from a default of closed, and we have to talk with them or persuade them about open? What's your sense of that?
I think it's just, you know, having to move away from the traditional where, you know, they can write a textbook and publish it and then get those, get that money from that, and then they can, you know, have a book that students have to purchase. I think there's that idea of the traditional approach, and moving away from that, I guess, is just something that still needs to be considered for a lot of faculty. One of my professors that I'm working with, you know, when they're later in their career, they don't have to worry about publishing. And I think, you know, as a newer professor, I think that's something that has to be considered. That idea of, you know, publishing to journals that are I guess that idea is important. I've been working on a video project for one of my courses, and one of my questions to the professor was, well, why don't we make these videos open? We could put them on YouTube. We could share them with everybody in the world. And I think there's a lot of fear in that as well. You know, do the people in the videos want to? Are they okay with having their video on YouTube for other people to look at? Some people are okay with that, and some people, they just don't want to.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points. Part of it is I think I might make a lot of money. I think anybody that's looked at the data knows that very few faculty make much money on textbooks. It's a extremely small number, but they have that hope, right? There's that dream that I might be the next Stuart Calculus who becomes a multimillionaire. You know, one of my favorite quotes in the open access movement, our faculty, I forget who it was, but somebody said, "I write to be read." And if you're doing research, for example, and the reason you're doing research is to share your ideas, to share the science with other people, if they can't read it, like, what's the point, right? So I love that. I write to be read, and the only way to be read by everybody is to make it open. I also think that there are antiquated barriers that we have in the education system, especially, well, in both primary and secondary and in tertiary or higher education. In higher education, our promotion and tenure rules are outdated, where when I go into promotion and tenure, I'm told that I have to publish in certain journals, and that if I publish in open access journals, that I might not get as many points. So there's some barriers we need to clear out of the way.
I agree. Christine, I'm so glad to see you. Thank you for adding so much to our discussion. Especially pleased to see a real-world example. And again, as I put on Twitter just now, I love your idea of instructional designers shifting from co-creating courses to co-creating textbooks. Cable, we have time for one more question, and then we're going to run out of time. The question came from Mark Wilson, who asked, are there any U.S. initiatives on OER for adult learners? Scotland has a national policy to support adult learners. What do you think?
You know, I've got a whole folder on OER and adult learners. And so let me, as a follow-up, send an email to Brian, and maybe he can put it on the webpage or share that resource out, or we'll tweet it as well with the right hashtag. I just need to dig a little bit. The answer is yes. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Oh, that's fine. That's an honest answer, and it's also an answer that points towards plenty, which is what I would expect. We have so much to cover, Cable, so many points to discuss, and if you take a look in the chat box, as you have been, you'll see there's been a lot of interesting discussion. Brett Besson and somebody else made a point that awareness of open is still so low among American faculty, and that's a real challenge. That's a real issue. We have a few more links in the chat, which I think are really important. But let me ask you, if I could, Kibble, for one last question. What do you think? What advice do you give a university or a college who wants to engage with open and they hear about the Creative Commons project? What's the best way they can engage with you guys?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, specifically in engaging with us, obviously all the Creative Commons licenses are free. Nobody has to ask permission. They can just use CC licenses anytime they want to. So that's part of the message. Somebody said lack of awareness, and they're absolutely right. Jeff Siemens' research out of Babson, he does an OER survey every couple of years, and his last batch of research showed that still 75% of higher education faculty in the United States don't know about or can't adequately or accurately define OER and what it is and why it's important. So we still have a huge awareness raising effort that needs to be done. We all need to teach other people about what this is, why it's important. One resource that I would share, maybe somebody could drop the link in. If you go to a search engine and just type in oerstrategy.org, maybe somebody could drop that in, oerstrategy.org. This is a nice doc that many of us created. It was actually several hundred people around the world contributed to an open writing process. And it's meant to be a document that looks at the movement. So it's us looking at ourselves, asking the question, as OER goes mainstream, what do we need to pay attention to, and what do we need to be better at than we are today? I share this because, A, it's a nice short doc, and I think you'll find it interesting, but it's also got a set of value propositions in it about why OER matters to people. And I think what's most important is that there are different reasons for different people, and that's okay. So for, like I said, the Americans are taking some flack right now from other parts of the world about focusing on open textbooks. I think that's unfair. I think that in the United States, textbooks are causing access problems. And to the extent that that's an issue, that it should be solved. And if it can be solved with OER, great, go do that. If you're in Qatar and your government pays for all of education and it's free and textbooks don't cost anything, then that's not a value proposition that makes sense to you. But what they care about in Qatar is how do they get their ideas out into a broader sphere than just their country. How they're concerned about currency of information. They're concerned about knowledge exchange. So they've got different sets of goals. They're concerned about remix, meaning they want to remix and experiment with new ideas as a way to think about an innovation economy. And so, I think as we look forward as institutions, we shouldn't call, OER is not about one thing. There's a whole set of value propositions. And I would say that, specifically what an institution can do is, well, first, I travel a lot, so I'm on the road. If you want me to come speak at your institution, I'm happy to. That's one of the ways we raise awareness. Very practically speaking, what faculty are starting to do is asking, hey, can I share some of my content as OER? Can I put an open license on some of, maybe all of my content, but maybe some, and share it? 2, can I use others' OER? 3, is there money, is there discretionary funding at my institution where I can convince my administration to put an open licensing requirement on it? And that does 2 things. One is it sends a signal to the institution that it's okay to share and it's actually beneficial to share. and it creates more OER in the process. And then the last thing I'd say, and this comes from my research colleagues out there, the folks at the OER Research Hub in the UK, at the OER Review Project at Brigham Young University, at Babson. These are all folks doing research on OER. University of South Africa, a big research unit as well. They beg all of us, whenever we have an OER project, please think about what kind of data you're tracking. What is it that you want to know at the end of your project, or as the project, maybe it's an indefinite project. What are the key performance indicators that your institution cares about? Time to degree, course completion rates, student success, however you measure it. What we see is that OER tends to move the needle in a positive way on all those things.
Cable, I gotta pause you because we're at the witching hour. And just to be clear, you're talking about people who are doing research on the use of OER.
That's right. And all those groups that I mentioned, they're happy to work with any OER project to help them set up a research on it.
Excellent, excellent. Cable, let me thank you so much for a terrific hour. Really informative, really, really useful. Folks, please track Cable, bring him to your campus or your institution so he can tell you more. Nathan, can you bring up the closing slide, please? I hate to rush things, but I actually have a plane to catch in 2 hours, so I'm going to need to skedaddle. As usual, we'll put up the recording of this in my notes up on my blog. Next week, we have, if you can just go back one, Nathan. Our next guest is going to be Curtis Bonk, who's professor of instructional systems technology at Indiana University. Curtis is another expert in open education, author of several books on the subject, and so we'll be continuing our open interest there. Let me ask you to look forward to that, RSVP for that event. Let me thank Cable once again for a terrific session. Let me thank all participants for contributing so much, from Alan and Christine and just Brett, everybody. And let me thank, again, Nathan and the rest of the Shindig staff for your technical support. You've been really, really helpful. Thank you all. See you on Twitter in the meantime, and then we'll see you in the next Future Trends Forum. Bye-bye.